I still have the paper. Not the original, a photocopy, third generation. Some of the footnotes are barely legible now. I have them memorized. I keep it in the top drawer of my desk, not framed, not displayed, in a drawer. I open it sometimes, not to read it, just to confirm it is still there. It is always still there. My name is Michael Malkin. I am 78 years old. I built the high-yield bond market in Britain and parts of Europe between 1983 and 2006. Before that, I spent 13 years building the same market in the United States, working for Burnham Lambert in Philadelphia and later New York. The business I built issued £247 billion in below-investment-grade corporate debt. We financed leveraged buyouts, hostile takeovers, corporate restructurings, and empire building across 3 decades. The business ended in 2008. I accepted a plea arrangement with the Serious Fraud Office. I paid £17 million in penalties and disgorgement. I was prohibited from serving as a director of a British company for 12 years. The prohibition expired last year. I did not reapply. I now run a charitable foundation in Tottenham that provides university scholarships to young people from backgrounds like mine. We funded 62 scholarships last year. On my desk is a photograph of my son Daniel. He died in 2003. He was 29 years old. Everything I am going to tell you over the next 8 episodes begins in 1968, in a library, in Philadelphia. I was 22 years old. I was a graduate student at the Wharton Business School. I was not the most prominent student in my year. I was not the most connected. I had no family money, no professional network, no mentor of particular standing. What I had was time and a library card and a growing certainty that the market was wrong about something important. I found the paper in March of 1968. It was published in 1961, 7 years earlier, by a professor named Gerald Marsh at the University of Chicago. The title was Historical Default Rates and Risk Premiums on Below-Investment-Grade Corporate Debt, 1900–1955. It was not a famous paper. It was not widely cited. I found it because I was reading everything I could find on corporate bond performance, and I had got to the M section of the card catalog. I read it on a Thursday afternoon. I remember the day because I missed a seminar on portfolio theory to finish reading it. I sat in a wooden chair in the third-floor reading room, and I read it twice. The first time, I thought I had misunderstood something. The second time I understood, I had not. The paper was 93 pages long. It analyzed 55 years of corporate bond data. Marsh had tracked every bond rated below investment grade, BB or lower, issued by American corporations between 1900 and 1955. He had tracked the default rates, the recovery rates, the total returns. He had compared those returns to investment-grade bonds over the same period. The data showed something very simple. A diversified portfolio of below-investment-grade bonds had historically outperformed investment-grade bonds on a risk-adjusted basis. The default rate was higher, obviously. That was why they were rated below investment grade. But the yield premium, the extra interest you received for taking on that risk, more than compensated for the defaults. Even after you accounted for the bonds that went to zero, you came out ahead, significantly ahead, if you diversified properly, if you did not bet everything on one issuer, if you built a portfolio. The market in 1968 was pricing junk bonds, that is what they were called, junk bonds, below investment-grade corporate debt, as if they were uninvestable, as if they were inherently toxic, as if owning them was speculation, not investment. Insurance companies could not own them. Pension funds could not own them. Mutual funds could not own them. They were restricted by charter or by regulation or by internal policy. The data said they were wrong. Not a little wrong, systematically wrong, decades wrong. I wrote my thesis on the mispricing of below investment grade corporate debt. I expanded Marsh's data set to 1967. I used slightly different methodology. I reached the same conclusion. The market was leaving money on the table. A lot of money. Someone was going to pick it up. My thesis advisor was a man named Dr. Philip Renner. He had worked at Morgan Stanley before coming to Wharton. He was well regarded. He read my thesis, and he told me it was interesting. Technically sound. The analysis was clean. The data was defensible. But the market I was describing did not exist. There was no market for junk bonds. There were only distressed situations and orphaned securities. You could not build a business on that. You could not build a department. You certainly could not build a career. I told him that was exactly the point. I graduated in 1970. I was 24 years old. I joined Burnham Lambert in Philadelphia. It was a mid-tier brokerage house, regional, not prestigious. They hired me because I was cheap and because one of the partners had read my thesis and thought it was interesting even if it was impractical. I had no clients, no desk of my own for the first 8 months, one telephone line I shared with another junior associate, and one idea. I had read something nobody else had read carefully enough. I believed that was sufficient. I was correct. I am not going to tell you the entire story of the next 30 years in this episode. That is what the rest of this series is for, but I am going to tell you what it felt like in 1970, what it felt like to be 24 years old and certain and poor and holding a photocopy of a paper published 9 years earlier. It felt simple. That is the part I want on record, how simple it felt. I understood something the market had missed. I had data, I had analysis, I had a thesis. All I needed to do was show people, show insurance companies, show pension funds, show corporate treasurers who were paying 12% interest on their debt because the market thought their bonds were uninvestable. Show them the data. Show them the returns. Show them that what they thought was junk was actually just mispriced. It felt like a gift, like I had been handed something valuable that nobody else wanted. I still believed that in 1975. I still believed it in 1980. I stopped believing it sometime in the middle. I do not remember exactly when. It was not a single moment. It was a long series of moments where being right stopped feeling simple and started feeling like something else. But in 1970 it was simple. I had the paper. I had the data. I had time. I made my first high-yield bond sale in November of 1970. A small insurance company in Wilmington, Delaware. They bought $200,000 of bonds issued by a regional steel fabricator rated B+. The bonds yielded 11.2%. Investment-grade bonds at the time were yielding 6.8%. The client was nervous. I showed them the Marsh paper. I showed them my thesis. I showed them the historical default rates. I explained that if they diversified across 20 issuers, the risk was manageable, and the returns were materially better than anything they could get in investment grade. They bought the bonds. The company did not default. The bonds matured in 1975. The client made their 11.2%. They called me in 1976. They wanted to buy more. That was how it started. One client, $200,000, 11.2%. By 1975, I had 18 clients. By 1980, I had 60. By 1983, Burnham Lambert had moved me to New York and given me a department. By 1985, I had left and started my own firm, Malkin Capital, London-based. We opened in February 1985 with 4 employees and £12 million under management. By 1990, we had 200 employees and £4 billion. By 2000, we had 600 employees and $18 billion. By 2006, we had 900 employees and $31 billion. I built that on a paper published in 1961 that nobody had read carefully enough. The paper is still in my drawer. 3rd-generation photocopy. I have had to recopy it 3 times over 50 years as the copies degraded. The current version is from 2004. Some of the charts are blurry now. The footnotes on page 67 are almost gone. I have them memorized. Footnote 43 references a 1938 study by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York on recovery rates in Chapter 11 restructurings. I do not need to read it. I know what it says. I keep the paper in the same drawer where I keep other documents, regulatory filings, correspondence, things I do not look at often but cannot throw away. There is a filing in that drawer from 2004. It is from Greylock Institutional Bond Fund, a large fund, British, very respected. They managed pension money mostly, local government pension schemes, NHS trusts, conservative investments, safe investments. The filing disclosed that between January 2003 and August 2006, Greylock had invested £4.2 billion in bonds issued or underwritten by Malkin Capital. £4.2 billion. In junk bonds. From the firm I built. The senior partner at Greylock in 2003 was Dr. Philip Renner, my thesis advisor from Wharton. The man who told me in 1969 that the market I was describing did not exist. He never called. He never wrote. I found out from the regulatory filing. We were required to disclose large institutional positions. I saw his name in the disclosure. I looked him up. He had left Wharton in 1979, joined Greylock in 1981, became senior partner in 1998. Between 2003 and 2006, his fund placed £4.2 billion with my firm. He never mentioned the thesis. He never mentioned Wharton. His fund treated us like any other counterparty, professional, courteous, distant. I do not know if he remembered me. I think he did. I keep the filing in the drawer with the Marsh paper. I do not know why I keep them together. I think I do know. In 2008, the Serious Fraud Office opened an investigation into Malkin Capital. The investigation concerned the accuracy of certain disclosures we made to institutional clients between 2004 and 2007. Disclosures about the underlying credit quality of specific bond issuances. The investigation took 2 years. In 2010, I accepted a plea arrangement. I paid £17 million. I accepted a 12-year directorship ban. The firm was dissolved. Greylock Institutional Bond Fund had exposure of £860 million to Malkin Capital bonds at the time of the collapse. They recovered $420 million in the restructuring. They lost £440 million. Dr. Renner retired in 2009. He never called. I still have the Marsh paper in the drawer. Next to it is something else, a letter. It arrived in 2004. I have never mentioned it to anyone. I am not sure why I am mentioning it now. It is from the University of Chicago archives. I had written to them in 2003, a casual inquiry. I wanted to know if they had any of Gerald Marsh's original research files, his notes, his correspondence. I told them I had built a career on his 1961 paper. I thought it might be interesting to see the materials behind it. They wrote back. They did have his files. They had sent them to me. 3 boxes. I went through them over a weekend. There was a letter in the second box, from Marsh to a colleague, dated 1963, 2 years after the paper was published. He was complaining. Nobody had cited his work. Nobody seemed to care. He had spent 6 years on the research, and the paper had been ignored. He wrote that he was not sure it mattered anymore. The data was probably right, but the conclusion might be wrong. Not wrong about the returns, wrong about what it meant. He had written one line, near the end of the letter. He said, "The premium exists because the risk is not mathematical. It is moral." I read that line in 2004, 36 years after I first read his paper. I had £200 billion under management, 900 employees, institutional clients in 14 countries. I did not know what he meant. I know now. I still have the paper. I have had it for 56 years. It is still in the drawer. It has always been enough. Next episode, Philadelphia, 1970 to 1982. He built a department at Burnham Lambert that nobody wanted, with clients nobody respected, selling bonds nobody would touch. By 1982, the department was producing 40% of the firm's revenue. That was when the empire builders noticed. That was when it stopped being simple. That was when Michael Malkin called. This has been High Junk, Episode 1. My name is Michael Malkin. Philadelphia, 1970 to 1982. I tell people I built a career on Marsh's paper. That is not quite true. I built a career on what everyone else refused to see in Marsh's paper. The difference matters. I graduated Wharton in May of 1970. Nixon had just invaded Cambodia. 4 students were dead at Kent State. The market had dropped 25% in 18 months. Nobody was hiring. Burnham Lambert was a second-tier firm, regional clients, corporate finance for companies that Goldman would not return calls to. They interviewed me because my professor knew someone. They offered me a position because I was cheap. The offer was for equities research, small caps, insurance companies, regional banks. I asked if I could work in fixed income instead. They said they did not have a fixed income department. I said I knew. The partner who hired me was named Leonard Katz. Len. He was 58. He had been at the firm since 1947. He wore the same brown suit every day. He ate lunch at his desk, a sandwich from home. He did not waste anything. Not money, not time, not words. He asked me why I wanted to work in a department that did not exist. I told him about the paper. He listened for 11 minutes without interrupting. Then he asked me one question. He said, "If the premium is real, why has nobody built a business on it?" I told him what I believed then. I said, because the clients who need the returns do not have access to the capital, and the clients who have the capital do not need the returns. He thought about that. Then he said, "Find me the clients who need the returns." I started in July. They gave me a desk in the back, near the bathroom, no secretary, no research assistant, no budget for travel. They gave me a phone. I called 463 institutions in the first 6 months. Pension funds, union funds, insurance companies, university endowments, hospital trusts, municipal retirement systems. I asked them the same question. What rate of return do you need to meet your obligations? Most of them hung up. Some of them laughed. 16 of them answered. The number was always the same, between 7 and 9% annually, compounded, guaranteed, forever. and they could not get it. Not in 1970. Not with Treasury bonds at 5.5%. Not with investment-grade corporates at 6%. Not without taking equity risk. And equity risk meant volatility. And volatility meant their actuaries would not sign off. And if their actuaries would not sign off, their boards would not approve. They were trapped. They had promises to keep and no way to keep them. I went back to Len. I told him I had found the clients. He asked me what they wanted. I said, fixed income returns that do not exist. He said, then make them exist. The market for below investment grade corporate bonds in 1970 was not a market, it was a junkyard. 90% of the issuance was fallen angels, companies that had been rated investment grade and had been downgraded, defaulted railroads, bankrupt retailers, steel companies that had missed payments. Nobody issued new high-yield debt intentionally. If you could not get an investment-grade rating, you could not issue bonds. You went to a bank. You took a loan. You paid 12%, and you were grateful. But I had read the paper. And the paper said the premium was 500 basis points, 5%. If a Treasury bond paid 5.5% and the default rate was 2%, then a bond yielding 10.5% was mathematically fair. Anything above that was excess return. Free money. If you bought enough of them. If you held them long enough. If you did not panic. The problem was the bonds did not exist. So I had to create them. I spent 8 months learning everything about 23 companies. Not large companies, not stable companies, companies that were too small or too new or too regional for the rating agencies to care about. A trucking company in Ohio, a cable television operator in North Carolina, a chicken processor in Arkansas, a motel chain in the Southwest, a manufacturer of industrial fasteners in Michigan. I read every filing. I called every competitor. I visited 12 of them in person. I paid for the travel myself. I was looking for one thing: cash flow. Not earnings, not growth, not management vision. Cash flow. Recurring revenue. Contracted revenue. Revenue that would be there in September and in March and in 5 years. Revenue that could service debt at 11% even if the economy slowed. Even if the sector struggled. Even if the company made mistakes. I found 9 companies that qualified. Then I wrote a memo. The memo was 41 pages. I sent it to Len and to the 3 other senior partners. I sent it on a Friday in April 1971. The memo had 2 proposals. First, Burnham Lambert should approach these 9 companies and offer to underwrite bond issuance at yields between 10 and 12%. The companies would get capital they could not otherwise access. We would get underwriting fees. Second, we should create a fund, a closed-end vehicle, to buy these bonds and hold them. We would market the fund to the 16 institutions I had spoken to. We would promise them 8.5% annually. We would keep the spread. The memo included a 20-year backtest, using Marsh's data, adjusted for defaults, adjusted for transaction costs, adjusted for liquidity risk. The model showed an annualized return of 11.3%, with volatility lower than the S&P 500. I waited. On Monday morning, Len called me into his office. He closed the door. He said 3 of the 4 partners thought I was insane. They said no institution would buy bonds from companies they had never heard of. They said no company would pay 12% when they could get a bank loan for the same price. They said if the idea had merit, Goldman would already be doing it. He said the 4th partner had not read the memo. Then he opened his desk drawer. He took out a checkbook. Personal, not corporate. He wrote a check for $50,000. He slid it across the desk. He said, "This is not firm capital. This is my money. If you are right, I want 10% of whatever you build. If you are wrong, you will pay me back over 30 years, and you will never mention this again." Then he said, "You have 18 months. I underwrote the first bond in August of 1971. A cable television operator in Raleigh, North Carolina. $22 million. 12-year maturity. 11.75% coupon. It took 4 months to sell. A pension fund in Ohio bought $8 million. A union trust in Pennsylvania bought $6 million. An insurance company in Missouri bought $5 million. We kept $3 million on our own balance sheet because no one else would take it. We made $87,000 in fees. Len made me frame the tombstone. He hung it in the hallway outside his office. It stayed there until the firm was sold in 1984. By the end of 1972, I had underwritten 6 transactions, $89 million in total issuance. The portfolio was yielding an average of 11.1%. Not one company had missed a payment. In 1973, I did 14 transactions, $240 million. In 1974, the market collapsed. Watergate, oil embargo, stagflation. The S&P dropped 30%. Not one of my companies defaulted. In 1975, the institution started calling me. By 1978, I had 16 people working for me, analysts, traders, underwriters. Len gave me an entire floor. We were doing 60 transactions a year, $1.5 billion in issuance. The portfolio had grown to $4 billion. The default rate, cumulative, over 7 years was 1.4%. Marsh had predicted 2%. We were beating the model. In 1981, Burnham Lambert earned $460 million in revenue. $180 million came from my department. 40%. Len retired in March of 1982. He was 70. He sold his stake in the firm. He sold his 10% stake in what I had built. He made $22 million. From a $50,000 check he wrote 11 years earlier. At his retirement party, he gave a speech. 4 minutes. He did not waste words. He said, "Michael Malkin understood something the rest of us did not. He understood that the world is full of companies that deserve capital and institutions that need returns, and the only thing separating them is permission." He said, "We gave him permission." Then he looked at me. He said, "Do not let them take it away." 3 weeks later, I got a call from Michael Malkin. He was 35 years old. He ran high yield at Drexel Burnham Lambert, West Coast, Beverly Hills office. He had built the same business I had built, except he had built it faster and bigger and louder. He did not call to congratulate me. He called to buy me. We met for breakfast. The Four Seasons, Philadelphia, May 1982. He was late. 30 minutes. He did not apologize. He sat down. He ordered egg whites and fruit. He did not look at the menu. He said, "You have $4 billion in assets under management. I have $11 billion. You did 60 deals last year. I did 200. You are very good at what you do, but I am better, and I am going to be bigger. So you have 2 options." He said, "You can join me. You move to Los Angeles. You run East Coast origination. You report to me. You get a percentage. You get very rich." He said, "Or you can compete with me, and I will destroy you." He said it without emotion. He said it the way you say the weather. Then he drank his coffee and waited. I told him no. He asked me why. I said, "Because you do not understand the paper." He laughed. He said, "I have read the paper. I have read everything, Hickman, Atkinson, Marsh. I understand it better than you do." I said, "You understand the math. You do not understand the conclusion." He stopped laughing. He said, "What conclusion?" I said, "The premium exists because the risk is not mathematical. It is moral." He stared at me. Then he said, "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard." He stood up. He said, "You're going to regret this." He left. He stuck me with the check. He was right about one thing. I did regret it, but not for the reason he thought. Next episode, 1982 to 1987. The empire builds itself. The money gets bigger. The deals get stranger. The clients stop asking questions. And somewhere in the machinery, the moral risk stops being theoretical. It becomes a man. His name was Daniel Frost. He worked for me. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. This has been High Junk, Episode 2.